Okay, let's take a look at another foul, and actually this is a set of fouls that we call the sentence structure errors. Now, you'll notice that I have a lot of different handouts here, and in order to work up to this one, I'm going to have to start with the sentence structure reference sheet, as well as the foundation handout for sentence structure. So I can't just jump straight in and start looking at those fouls. So looking at the reference sheet, you'll see that there's 3 different groupings. The first one are co-ordinating conjunctions. These have the nickname fanboys. Reason being, we can take the first letter of each conjunction and then it gives us the word fanboys. So anytime you hear fanboys, we're referring to the co-ordinating conjunctions. Now, in the middle, this is a great big list of terms here that are subordinating words. And since that's so much to keep saying over and over and over again, we're going to call these subs. So anytime you hear or see sub, it's referring to one of the subordinating words. And unfortunately, there's way too many of these to make a little helpful reminder like fanboys that there's no way to do that. And then the third grouping, these are the conjunctive adverbs and transitional phrases. And we'll abbreviate these. Conjunctive adverb, and then transitional phrase. So we're going to start to look in just a few minutes at how we can use these different terms. So with that said, let's go ahead and lay some foundation for sentence structure. So looking inside of sentences, we can find phrases and clauses. What is a phrase? A phrase is a group of words with no subject, no verb. And most folks are familiar with a very common type of phrase, which is a prepositional phrase. And if you've ever parsed a sentence before, you get in the quick habit of putting parentheses around prep phrases for that very reason, that there's no subject, no verb, and that allows you to help concentrate on subject-verb agreement. So, an example of a phrase, we were just talking about prepositional phrases. We'll put one in here. That would be an example of a phrase, between the two houses. Why is that a phrase? It's a group of words, there's no subject, no verb. So in other words, a phrase is very, very weak. Now, up next is a clause. What is a clause? It is a group of words with subject and verb. So a clause is a group of words with subject and verb. So a clause is stronger than a phrase. Now, there's 2 different types of clauses. You'll notice right underneath, independent and dependent. Now, before we talk about these and define in relations to English, let's just think about what the words independent and dependent mean outside of English class. So, for example, I am independent of my parents. What does that mean? That means I do not rely upon them. I love them, but I make it day to day, week to week, year to year without their assistance. I am independent. However, my daughters are dependent upon me. Right? So what does that mean? They rely upon me. So now, let's take that understanding and apply it to our definition here. So, an independent clause, right, is a group of words with subject and verb. That is independent. That can stand alone. And it can stand alone because it expresses a complete thought. Now you might be saying to yourself, wow, Mr. K, that sounds a lot like a sentence. Bingo, you got it. That would be a synonym, right? Because this is what we have to have in order to have a sentence. So an example would be, right? I am hoping to sleep late this weekend. Why is that an independent clause? We can find actor and action, right? Subject and verb, plus it expresses a complete thought. Now, what's next is the dependent clause. So we'll take our understanding of the word dependent and apply it here to our definition, which is a group of words with subject and verb, but remember it's dependent. But it cannot stand alone. Now, the reason why it cannot stand alone is because of, remember what that stands for? Subordinating word. Good. The reason being is that every dependent clause begins with a sub. So now, what I could do is just pick one of those, the most common sub, because, right, so that's my sub. It'll label it. So I'm just going to add this in front of my previous independent clause. And we'll see something happen. We'll see some magic happen, right? Boom. What happened? Because I am hoping to sleep late this weekend. Do you see how now this does not express a complete thought? This gives us a dependent clause. So anytime I spy a sub, that's going to give me a dependent clause. Now, a dependent clause can't stand by itself. A dependent clause relies upon an independent clause to complete its thought. So now, pause the video and then go through this quick review and identify the following as independent clauses, dependent clauses, or phrases. And you'll notice that we're picking up some abbreviations here because I'm really lazy. So this is independent clause and then dependent clause. So go ahead and pause the video and then we'll come back and we'll see how we did. Okay, so you should have completed those by now. If you haven't, please do so I can move my coffee cup and take a little drink of coffee here. So now, the first one what do we see? We see the word since. And if we look on our handy-dandy reference sheet, we see it's a sub. Since the potato was an unfamiliar plant. That has subject and verb, but doesn't have a complete thought, so that's a dependent clause. The next one, peasants were unwilling to grow or eat it. Ah, that makes sense, right? We have subject and verb, complete thought, independent clause. The next one, to reduce a high fever quickly. There's no subject, no verb, that's just a phrase. Now, what am I going to circle here at the beginning? Yep, you got it. That's a sub. Right? I have a sub here, dependent clause, and then the last one, many people still refer to their cars as not made in America. Subject, verb, complete thought, independent clause. So now, what we can do next, now that we have the foundation laid for sentences, is we can dive in and take a look at the sentence structure errors next.